Before we begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, because what you're about to hear is a story that connects nations in ways history books never fully captured. Today, we uncover a long-buried chapter, a forgotten moment of bravery so extraordinary that it echoes across continents. This is the story of how a small battalion of Filipino soldiers, lost deep inside the mist-covered mountains of eastern China, fought a devastating battle not for glory, not for conquest, but to save the lives of American officers trapped behind collapsing lines. It's a story of courage, desperation, betrayal, and the unbreakable bond forged in the chaos of war. This is the forgotten Battle of Jinhua, a story the world almost never knew, until now. The year was 1951. China's eastern provinces simmered under the tension of fractured alliances and unexpected foreign movements. The mountainous region near Jinhua City, dense bamboo forests, steep ridges, and winding river valleys, became a silent refuge for military units moving through the shadows. Among them was the 15th Filipino Volunteer Company, a fictional humanitarian defense unit deployed under a covert multinational rescue directive. They were not meant to fight. Their mission was simple: extract stranded civilians and medical teams caught between warring factions. But fate rarely keeps missions simple. Unknown to Manila, Washington, or even Beijing, a group of high-ranking American intelligence officers had been ambushed and isolated near Jinhua. And while no one expected the Filipino unit to intervene, destiny pushed them into the heart of a battle far bigger than themselves. Captain Ramon Alcantara, a 32-year-old Filipino commander known for his calm decisiveness, received the distress transmission at dawn. The message was fragmented, drowned in static, and nearly impossible to decipher. All they caught was, "American team ambushed. Jinhua, need extraction casualties." His men were exhausted, having trekked for 2 straight days through soaked terrain after escorting Chinese villagers to safety. Yet when Alcantara studied the coordinates, he felt an uneasy certainty. It wasn't their mission, but it was their responsibility. War had a way of binding strangers together. Beside him stood Sergeant Elias Vergara, built like a stone wall and loyal enough to follow Alcantara into hell. "Sir," he muttered, "those Americans won't last an hour out there." Alcantara nodded. "Then we leave in 5. The journey into the Jinhua highlands was brutal. Torrential rains turned the dirt paths into sucking mud, while thick fog erased visibility. Each step felt like walking into a vanished world. The Filipino troops moved in silence, navigating with compasses and instinct. Strange echoes drifted through the trees, metallic clatters, distant explosions, and intermittent rifle bursts. The atmosphere pulsed with tension, as though the mountains themselves held their breath. For some soldiers, fear crept in. Corporal Mateo Ginio gripped his rifle tighter. "Why are we even here?" he whispered. "These aren't our battles." But Private Santos, the youngest in the unit, replied softly, "Maybe not. But they're people who need saving." That simple truth kept them moving deeper into the unknown. By midday, the Filipino unit reached the ridge overlooking the valley where the distress call originated. What they saw chilled them. Below was a shattered military convoy. American trucks burned, overturned, and riddled with shell impacts. Smoke curled into the sky like desperate pleas. Nearby, huddled behind makeshift cover, were approximately 10 surviving American officers pinned down by an organized hostile militia. The attackers moved with precision, encircling the remaining Americans like wolves. "We're outnumbered 6-1, Sergeant Vergara assessed grimly. But Captain Alcantara saw something more alarming. The Americans had wounded men, and their ammunition was almost gone. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution in progress. He made his decision instantly. "We go down there. We protect them. No one dies today." The descent was chaos. The Filipino soldiers used the terrain to their advantage, sliding down slopes, taking cover behind fallen logs, and repositioning fluidly. Once within range, they opened fire with sharp precision, catching the attackers completely off guard. The valley erupted. Bullets shredded bamboo stalks, grenades sent earth flying, and echoes thundered between cliffs. The Americans, shocked to see unexpected reinforcements, rallied immediately. Lieutenant Parker, their surviving leader, shouted, "Who the hell are they, angels?" One American medic, desperately bandaging a wounded comrade, whispered, "They're not supposed to be here, but thank God they are." As the Filipino troops pushed forward, the once doomed American positions slowly stabilized. What the Filipinos didn't know was that the hostile force was not a random militia. They were an elite renegade faction seeking classified American documents carried by the officers, documents that revealed intelligence networks across East Asia. Losing those documents would ignite geopolitical disaster. The attackers intensified their pressure, determined to secure the intel at any cost. Captain Alcantara sensed their desperation. "They want something," he muttered. "Something they can't leave without." This realization made their mission even more urgent. Saving the Americans wasn't simply humanitarian. It was critical to preventing international fallout. And so, the Filipinos fortified the valley, preparing for the inevitable second wave. As night approached, mist thickened across the valley floor. Rain drizzled, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected muzzle flashes. The attackers launched the second assault with terrifying coordination. They advanced from three sides, their footsteps muffled by wet soil. Alcantara's men responded fiercely. Machine gun bursts streaked through the darkness. Grenades boomed in rolling waves. American and Filipino soldiers fought back to back, their survival tied together by raw necessity. Private Santos, trembling yet determined, shielded a wounded American lieutenant from incoming fire. "You're too young for this," the officer winced. Santos replied, "War doesn't wait for age, sir." His voice cracked, but his aim did not. Still, the situation worsened. The attackers had more manpower, more weapons, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The Filipino unit was bleeding ammunition fast. Sergeant Vergara crawled to Alcantara during a short lull. "Sir, if we stay here, we die here," he warned. Alcantara surveyed the injured Americans, the dwindling ammo crates, and the encroaching shadows. He realized they had only one option: break out. Not retreat, escape. They needed higher ground, defensible terrain, and a chance to call for extraction. "Prepare the wounded," he ordered. "We're moving east." We climbed the ridge. The Americans looked at him in disbelief. "In the dark?" one asked. "Better dark than dead," Alcantara replied. The breakout began under the shroud of night. Filipino soldiers formed a protective perimeter around the wounded Americans, carrying them on improvised stretchers. Every sound mattered. Every step mattered. Twigs snapped. Crickets paused. Even the wind seemed to watch. The renegade militia quickly detected the movement and pursued, sending intermittent gunfire through the trees. But the Filipinos executed evasive maneuvers flawlessly, using their jungle training to mislead their trackers. It was a terrifying trek, haunting whispers in the dark, distant shouts, and the constant fear of ambush. Many soldiers silently prayed with each step they took. By dawn, they reached the eastern ridge, an elevated stronghold that overlooked the entire valley. But the victory was short-lived. Ammunition had run dangerously low. 3 Filipinos were wounded. 2 Americans were in critical condition. And the enemy was climbing after them, relentless as a rising tide. Alcantara knelt beside a rock, exhaling sharply. "We hold this ridge," he declared. "This is where we make our stand." The Americans, despite their injuries, helped fortify the area with sandbags and debris. Sergeant Vergara chuckled bitterly. "You know," he said to an American officer, "this was supposed to be a rescue mission, not a last stand." The officer smiled weakly. Then let's make it a legendary one. What followed became the defining moment of the Battle of Jinhua. As the enemy reached the ridge, the Filipinos unleashed the last of their heavy firepower: machine guns, grenades, even emergency signal flares repurposed as incendiaries. The ridge shook with explosive power. The attackers staggered, regrouped, and charged again. Filipino soldiers fought like cornered lions. American officers fired beside them, refusing to be dead weight. The cooperation between the two groups became seamless, instinctive, almost poetic in its desperation. Captain Alcantara bellowed commands with unbroken resolve. Private Santos, despite exhaustion, refused to abandon his post. Every man on that ridge became a symbol of unyielding courage. Hours passed. The attackers adapted. They moved in smaller units, attempting flanking maneuvers. The Filipinos countered with tactical discipline learned from years of jungle warfare. At one point, Corporal Jinhua spotted an enemy sniper nest. With no grenades left, he improvised, hurling a lit ration can that exploded from internal pressure, forcing the snipers to abandon position. Only a Filipino would think of that. Sergeant Vergara laughed in disbelief. The Americans watched with newfound respect. They had never seen soldiers so resourceful, turning scraps into weapons and desperation into strategy. But the enemy leader, known only by the codename Chilon, was no ordinary commander. She was tactical, ruthless, and driven by a mission she refused to abandon. Chilon ordered her forces to encircle the ridge entirely and cut off every escape route. For the first time, Captain Alcantara felt doubt creep in. "If they complete the circle," he whispered, "we're finished." Lieutenant Parker overheard him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You got us this far," he said. "You'll get us out." Alcantara nodded. But in truth, he didn't know how much longer they could survive. Miraculously, they intercepted a weak radio signal, just strong enough to call for emergency extraction. Alcantara grabbed the transmitter. "This is Captain Ramon Alcantara of the Philippine contingent. We have wounded American officers. Enemy forces closing in. Request immediate evacuation at Ridge Point Echo 9. Static swallowed half his words. The reply came faint and broken. "Understood. Hold position. Extraction inbound 15 minutes. The soldiers exhaled, but relief was dangerous. 15 minutes in battle could feel like 15 years. The enemy launched their most aggressive assault yet. Dozens stormed the ridge simultaneously, firing wildly. The Filipinos held the front line with whatever ammunition remained, some firing single shots, others switching to bayonets when magazines emptied. Hand-to-hand combat erupted among the rocks. American officers fought with fierce determination despite their injuries. Sergeant Vergara disarmed an attacker with raw strength, using his rifle like a club. Private Santos shielded a wounded American medic, taking a grazing bullet to the shoulder, but refusing aid. The ridge became a battlefield of willpower. Then came the explosion. A mortar shell struck the left flank, sending soil and debris flying. Several soldiers were injured, including Corporal Jinhua, who rolled down a small slope and disappeared beneath thick brush. "Jinhua!" Santos shouted, but Alcantara grabbed his arm. "Not now, we hold the line." They had no choice. The enemy surged again, stepping over the crater left by the blast. The Filipinos gritted their teeth and pushed back with ferocity, determined not to let the ridge fall. Suddenly, a thunderous sound echoed across the mountains. It wasn't gunfire. It was the distant roar of helicopter blades. The extraction team was arriving. But the attackers heard it too, and desperation drove them into a frenzy. They stormed the ridge with reckless abandon, trying to overwhelm the Filipinos before help could land. Alcantara shouted, "Hold them. Just a little longer." The helicopters descended through the mist, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust and broken leaves. The extraction team deployed ropes and stretcher harnesses. American officers were evacuated first, but many refused to leave until the Filipinos boarded as well. Lieutenant Parker, bleeding heavily, grabbed Alcantara's vest. "Your men saved us," he insisted. "We leave together." But the ridge was collapsing into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. Smoke thickened. The decision-making window shrank. Alcantara ordered Vergara, "Get the wounded Americans up first, move." The sergeant obeyed, dragging 2 injured officers toward the hovering chopper. One Filipino soldier, Private Santos, nearly slipped off the ridge while lifting a wounded American. An enemy fighter charged toward them, blade raised. At the last second, Corporal Jinhua, who had survived the earlier explosion, emerged from the brush and tackled the attacker off the ridge. Both disappeared down the slope. "Jinhua!" Santos screamed again, but this time there was no answer. His sacrifice bought them precious seconds. The attacker's final push came like a tidal wave. Chilan herself led the charge, firing with ruthless precision. She aimed directly at Alcantara, but Sergeant Vergara intercepted, taking the bullet through his vest and collapsing. "Vergara!" Alcantara roared, pulling him behind cover. The sergeant coughed. "Still alive, sir, finish this." With fury surging through him, Alcantara returned fire, forcing Chilan and her forces to retreat just enough to allow the final evacuation. The last American officer was lifted away. Now it was the Filipinos' turn, but the helicopters were taking heavy fire and beginning to pull back. Alcantara grabbed the radio. "We need one more run." The pilot hesitated. "We're low on fuel. Enemy fire too strong. Can only hover for 30 seconds. 30 seconds to evacuate 6 remaining Filipino soldiers." Alcantara shouted to his men. "Prepare for extraction. Move like your lives depend on it, because they do." The final evacuation was a blur of adrenaline. The helicopter hovered dangerously low. Filipino soldiers sprinted toward the ropes as bullets snapped past their helmets. Alcantara helped lift the wounded Vergara first. Santos climbed next, gripping the rope with trembling hands. 2 more soldiers boarded. Time was nearly gone. The pilot yelled, 10 seconds. Alcantara prepared to jump, but saw one soldier pinned behind a fallen tree. He sprinted back under fire, grabbed the man, and dragged him toward the rope. The helicopter began rising. Alcantara tossed the wounded soldier onto the last harness. But as he reached for the rope, a burst of gunfire forced the chopper to ascend prematurely. Alcantara slipped, hitting the ground hard. Dust and leaves swirled as the helicopter lifted away. Santos screamed from above, "Captain! Captain!" But Alcantara pushed himself to his feet, blood dripping down his temple. The enemy forces, seeing the helicopter leaving, closed in around him. Alcantara knew he would not be rescued. But he also knew he could not allow the enemy to discover which helicopter carried the Americans and the sensitive intelligence they protected. So he made a final stand, alone on the ridge, surrounded on all sides. With his last magazine, he fired deliberately, buying the helicopter extra seconds to escape uncontested. The attackers swarmed him. Chilan approached with cold fury. But before she could deliver the final strike, another distant helicopter appeared, this one armed. The new aircraft unleashed a barrage of suppressive fire that forced the attackers to scatter. 2 extraction soldiers rappelled down, grabbing Alcantara's semi-conscious body. Chilan retreated into the forest, vanishing like a shadow. Alcantara was airlifted into safety just as his vision blurred into darkness. The Battle of Jinhua was finally over. When the Filipino and American survivors reunited at a field hospital, emotions ran high. Lieutenant Parker shook Alcantara's hand with deep reverence. "Your men saved our lives," he said. "You weren't obligated to help, but you did. And the world will never forget that." But Alcantara knew the truth. Many of his soldiers had not survived. Their bravery had come with heavy cost. The operation was immediately classified, buried beneath layers of diplomatic sensitivity. Neither China nor the United States wished to publicly describe a multinational firefight taking place on contested terrain. The Philippines, too, chose silence to avoid geopolitical backlash. The heroes of Jinhua disappeared from official records, ghosts in the margins of history. But for the men who lived through it, the memory burned brightly. Every year, American and Filipino survivors exchanged letters, honoring Corporal Ginio's sacrifice, Sergeant Vergara's courage, and the many unnamed soldiers who fought relentlessly. What happened on that ridge shaped them forever. It taught them that heroism is not bound by nationality, mission orders, or political borders. It belongs to those who choose to act. And so this documentary stands as their legacy, a story hidden for decades, now finally told. A story of Filipino bravery in the mountains of China, of American lives saved, of a battle fought not for recognition but for humanity. This is the forgotten Battle of Jinhua, the day Filipino soldiers rewrote fate through courage, loyalty, and absolute sacrifice. And now that you've heard their story, tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of this battle moved you the most?